Pick up a gun and fight? I don't think this is what God wants for me.
There's sure to be something you can do.
Yeah, like what? Maybe it was a mistake going back to Germany.
Dietrich?
Yeah?
You know I left the Justice Department?
Yes, I know.
I'm working now with General Oster and Admiral Canaris at the Abwehr.
Military intelligence.
Not everyone in the military wants this war, you know.
No, they're all pacifists, I suppose.
Oster just leaked Hitler's invasion plans to Holland and Belgium.
You shouldn't be telling me this, Hans.
Why not? Have you thought about what you're going to do when your call papers arrive?
Yes, I thought about it, but I don't know what I'm going to do.
We can get you a certificate that would make you unavailable for military service.
A what? A certificate?
You'd be classified indispensable.
What do you mean, indispensable?
The resistance needs a courier. Someone with international contacts and a valid reason to travel. Someone who can let the Allies know what we are doing and negotiate a ceasefire. Officially, you'd be a theologian, but unofficially...
A spy.
Unpleasant, I know, for a man of God.
Come on, Hans. Wait a minute. You're asking me to be a spy?
Yes.
I'm a minister. I'm not a politician.
But that's why the Allies will listen to you. You're trusted. Respected.
That is treason, Hans.
Treason or not, we've got to get rid of Hitler.
What does get rid of mean?
Exactly what it says.
But Hans, he was elected. Hitler is the truly chosen authority. The people idolize him, even more so now because of his military success.
He has perverted his authority. Dietrich, we've been through every scenario. Abide the law, arrest him, put him on trial. You know very well there is no law now. He has destroyed it.
But murder, Hans. Murder. That is what you're suggesting, isn't it?
He's the murderer, Dietrich. And he will continue to murder.
I can't, Hans. I'm sorry, I can't.
Come home with me. I want to show you something. Arson, forced death, murder, lies, suffering, extermination camps. It's all documented here. The true history of the Third Reich.
What do you want me to do?
Even before the war, German opponents of Hitler had considered overthrowing the Nazi regime. A successful coup, however, depended upon the support of key German military figures. Their readiness to take such risks diminished with the German victories in Poland and on the Western Front. German resistance groups hoped to convince their Allied contacts of their seriousness and win foreign support for the overthrow of the Nazi regime. In October 1940, Dietrich Bonhoeffer began work as an agent for military intelligence at the Abwehr, supposedly using his ecumenical contacts to help the cause of the Reich. In reality, he used his contacts to spread information about the resistance movement. In trips to Italy, Switzerland, and Scandinavia in 1941 and 1942, he informed them of resistance activities and tried, in turn, to gain foreign support for the German resistance. There was great hope put in Bonhoeffer's foreign contacts, particularly in Bishop George Bell's ability to carry messages to high levels of British government. In turn, Bonhoeffer tried to convince his foreign contacts that some Allied signal of support for the German conspiracy was absolutely crucial, since only this would convince the German military to move against Hitler. The Allied governments greeted these peace feelers with distrust. The military members of the resistance wanted guarantees of German territorial integrity and of their own position as leaders of a post-war Germany. Allied diplomats and leaders found this demand unacceptable and never seriously considered support for a German coup. In January 1943, Churchill and Roosevelt announced that only the unconditional military defeat of Germany would eradicate Nazism. Discouraged by the non-support of the Allies, the resistance became even more intent upon killing Adolf Hitler.
One of the things he says in ethics is that the old kind of ethics doesn't work anymore, that the rules have changed so radically under Nazism that the only thing someone can do really is throw themselves on the mercy of God and do what they think is right and follow it through. And that's what you see him doing.
On July 20th, 1944, the resistance launched its final attempt to assassinate Adolf Hitler. Colonel Klaus von Stauffenberg carried a bomb contained in a briefcase into a meeting with Hitler and his generals in East Prussia. Von Stauffenberg armed the device in a room next to the meeting, but was able to activate only half the explosives in the case.
When Stauffenberg walked into the room, he asked an aide to place him near Hitler so that he could follow everything that was being said, because his hearing was somewhat impaired through having been wounded in North Africa. And he was placed about 2 persons away from Hitler. It seems that after he had left, someone shoved the briefcase further under the table, under the great map table, which was had a very heavy tabletop, and that may have protected Hitler somewhat.
The bomb destroyed the bunker, killing many of the officers. But Hitler was only wounded.
After the explosion, and after Hitler had survived the explosion, Hitler was, of course, at first furious, then elated, then furious again, but he was very much elated, and he said, it's a miracle, I've survived, I'm invulnerable.
Hitler vowed to kill all the members of the conspiracy. The fate of von Dohnanyi and Bonhoeffer was effectively sealed.
Over the next few months, most of the group, including Wilhelm Canaris and Hans Oster, were either executed or committed suicide. 90 of the supposed conspirators were executed between August 1944 and April 1945 at the Plattensee prison. It's estimated that 4,980 Germans were executed after the July plot. Hitler decided that the leaders should have a slow death. They were hung with piano wire from meat hooks, and their executions were filmed. Still, even after the failure of the July 20th, 1944 attempt to kill Hitler, it was months before the Nazis realized the extent of Bonhoeffer's involvement in resistance circles. In October 1944, Bonhoeffer was moved to the dreaded Tegel Gestapo prison in Berlin. In February 1945, he was taken to Buchenwald. He was then moved to Flossenburg concentration camp, where on April 9th, he was hanged together with many of his other conspirators.
Maria, believe in the future, no matter what. Remember, it was courage that brought us here.
Prisoners stripped.
You tremble, Pastor. Afraid? I'm cold. So, this is the end. No. Give unto thy servants that peace which the world cannot give.
it's not difficult to see why Bonhoeffer's participation in the resistance against Hitler raises ethical issues. So at this juncture in our presentation, we are going to discuss Bonhoeffer's ethics of the resistance and the common critiques of his resistance. So, what were Bonhoeffer's ethics of resistance? Before we can answer that question, we need to get a scope of his ethics at large. First and foremost, Dietrich Bonhoeffer's ethics are Christocentric. Everything for Bonhoeffer focuses and centers around the man, the God-man, Jesus Christ. Secondly, Bonhoeffer's ethics, as we see, are ontological or virtue-based ethics. In his book entitled Ethics, he says, "What is worse than doing evil is being evil. It is worse for a liar to tell the truth than of a lover of truth to lie. It is worse when a misanthropist practices brotherly love than when a philanthropist gives way to hatred. Better than truth in the mouth of the liar is the lie. Better than the act of brotherly love on the part of the misanthrope is hatred. One sin, then, is not like another. They do not all have the same weight. There are heavier sins and lighter sins. A falling away is of infinitely greater weight than a falling down. The most shining virtues of him who has fallen away are as black as night in comparison with the darkest lapses of the steadfast." So for Bonhoeffer, ethics are about being, having ethical being, who you are, your virtue being good. Thirdly, Bonhoeffer's ethics are situational, and others classify this as consequential. The situational ethics basically is when one promotes love, and each situation must be taken into account. Lastly, Bonhoeffer's ethics overall can be characterized as being others-focused. This is a large part of his sociology, and his I-thou relationship that he talks about in Sanctorum Communio. So, furthermore with this, his others-focused in the resistance then is for the sake of the Jews and for the sake of the world and good being brought. Now that we have taken a broad view of Bonhoeffer's overall ethics, now we can delve into his ethics of the resistance. At the beginning, Bonhoeffer basically dispenses with the 6 main approaches to ethics that have been done throughout the centuries, those being reason, moral fanaticism, ethics from conscience, duty, free responsibility, and silent virtue. All of these, he says, are inadequate to deal with what he says, quote, the present struggle, which would be that with Hitler, the Third Reich, and the Nazi regime. The question then is why? Why are these approaches inadequate to deal with such a problem? Bonhoeffer says it's because they cannot account for coup d'etat and tyrannicide. So the question then is, what can account for coup d'etat and tyrannicide? His answer is responsible action. The question of responsible action, then, is not the traditional question of ethics. It's not the question, what is good, or what should be done, but rather the question for Bonhoeffer of responsible action is, what is the will of God? This seems to be very similar to Soren Kierkegaard's teleological suspension of the ethical, which he writes about in Fear and Trembling, with Abraham obeying God in sacrificing his son on the altar. It is ethical to obey God and do His will, even if obeying His will seems contrary to the fact. So, how does one decipher the will of God? Well, for Bonhoeffer, it's twofold: Christology and what he calls the structure of the responsible life. With Christology, Bonhoeffer's Christological ethics are all about conformation to Christ, being conformed to Christ, and what he calls Gestalt Christi, the form of Christ. And with regard to his ethics and Christology, Bonhoeffer puts Christ in opposition to Hitler. So first, with his Christology, is Christ as the reconciler of God and the world. He reconciles God and the world. To quote, he says, God takes upon God's own self the guilt of the world, that being in Christ, rather than the destroyer, Hitler. The second aspect of his Christology is the incarnate Christ, or the incarnate one. And this he puts in contrast to what he calls the despiser of men, which for him is Hitler. So, to be conformed to the incarnate one is to be really human before God, to truly be human. Christ becoming incarnate is God becoming man, becoming human. And so, being conformed to Christ is being truly human, which for Bonhoeffer is opposed to the Nazi ideology, the Aryan ideal of the National Socialism, which ultimately led to anti-Semitism. The third factor of Bonhoeffer's Christology is Christ as the crucified one, which is over against Hitler, which would be the successful man. He says that being conformed to the crucified one is to daily live under the sentence of God upon sin, to live as justified only by grace. So the implications then are suffering. This means suffering for the Christian, suffering and crucifixion with Christ. And Clifford Green says, in commenting upon this, that resistance to tyranny meant walking the path of suffering, including acceptance of the judgment of God. The final aspect of Christology that Bonhoeffer pulls from is Christ as the resurrected or risen one, as opposed to Hitler, who idolizes death. So resurrection versus death. Green again quotes, says, living as a new person before God. This is what it means to be conformed to the resurrected one. But this is life in the midst of death, and righteousness in the midst of sin. So all of this is in opposition to Hitler's culture of death that he is bringing upon the world. So thus, being conformed to Christ, who is opposed to Hitler, therefore means resistance. Because Christ is opposed to Hitler's regime, therefore Christ followers are to be conform to Christ in their resistance to him. The second aspect of Bonhoeffer's structure of the responsible life is freedom, Freiheit. He says that it's the readiness to take on guilt. This is the first aspect of freedom. Willingly taking on the guilt of your own actions. He says, quote, "To set one's personal innocence above responsible action for humanity is to be blind to the more irredeemable guilt that one incurs precisely in doing so." So Bonhoeffer's saying there's more guilt in not taking action than there is in taking action. That it's better to act vicariously for the sake of millions and millions of people on the face of the earth than it is. It's better to do that than just simply bearing the guilt of killing one person, pretty much. So. Eberhard Bethke posed the question, how could Bonhoeffer, in light of this, not take action? And he says that for Bonhoeffer not to fail to do so in the face of Nazi aggression and the Holocaust would be to incur the greater culpability. So moving on, the last section he talks about freedom. And freedom that's understood in the classical Christian sense, that is to do the good, that is ultimately freedom to love God and one's neighbor. He talks about the freedom in the sense of a wager, the wager of a concrete decision. The wager must be done freely and in surrender. Again, to the consequences of your actions. To quote Green, he says, "Being willing to risk responsible action while surrendering any self-justification of its intrinsic goodness means both being a freely responsible historical actor and leaving the course of history in the hands of God." So, in sum, Bonhoeffer's view, his ethics of resistance, can be summed up in this. This is a quote from Bonhoeffer in Letters and Papers from Prison. He says, "This depends on a God who demands responsible action in a free wager of faith, and who promises forgiveness and consolation to the man who becomes a sinner in that venture." So for Bonhoeffer, it's better to participate in the resistance and take upon oneself the guilt that would be incurred in participating in tyrannicide and coup d'etat than it is to not. So Clifford Green concludes all of Bonhoeffer's ethics thus far, ethics of resistance, saying, "In war, there is killing, lying, and expropriation, solely in order to restore to their rightful place life, truth, and property." This was precisely the purpose of Bonhoeffer and his colleagues in the conspiracy. So now that we've looked at Bonhoeffer's ethics and ethics of resistance, what are the common critiques of Bonhoeffer's resistance? The most common critique, it comes from the pacifists, and particularly reading Robert Brimlow, he says that Bonhoeffer really understood the situation wrong, that he didn't have to sin in order to stop Hitler, and basically that pacifism is the better route. Also, another critique of Bonhoeffer is his the development of his view, because he started off as a pacifist, which we see strongly in the Cost of Discipleship, and then moved to a more position of violence and resistance. So, you know, changing his views, that's seen as kind of a flaw, maybe not a flaw, but a weakness in his view. But the whole question of ethics in resistance raises a whole slew of other questions regarding Christian ethics. One would be, should Christians participate in war? This is highly debated. We have, you know, just war theory, holy war, and pacifism. Very big question that resistance throws open the floodgates for. Another is, should Christians participate in government and culture? Is Christ against culture? Is he for culture? Is it one or the other? You know, what is the role of the Christian in government? Another interesting thing for Bonhoeffer is, in his own context, is what about the unity between church and state? If Bonhoeffer is simply resisting the state, that's one thing. But if he's resisting the church that's participating in this evil with the state, what does that imply about his resistance? I think that there can be some justification there, possibly. Another question is, should Christians participate in tyrannicide and coup d'etat? This has been debated, talked about in Thomas Aquinas and John Calvin as well. Just huge questions that this raises that we don't have time to even begin to break ground on, but they're important nonetheless. Another question is, are Bonhoeffer's ethics consequential? Is he maximizing the good and minimizing the bad? You know, maximizing the good would be stopping Hitler, of course, and the war. And this would certainly minimize the bad, ceasing the war, 50 million dying by the end of the war, and the dismantling of the genocide and the killing of the Jews. So is it consequentialist? You know, I think it probably is in some ways. He could have more explicitly taken that route and been just as justified in doing so. Another objection could possibly be, you know, would not Christology or Christ's teachings lead one to nonviolence rather than to violence? Huge issue. Lastly, do desperate times call for desperate measures? I mean, that is a huge question. Some say yes, some say no. So it's important for us, when we're doing ethics and analyzing Bonhoeffer's ethics, to recognize that oftentimes when we're ethicizing, we use extreme examples. And knowing that these extreme examples, these situations are possible and rare, but with Bonhoeffer, it wasn't just a hypothetical possibility of an extreme situation with Hitler and, you know, genocide and World War. It was a reality, and a lot is at stake when it's not just hypothetical, but really there. In conclusion, we would say that for Bonhoeffer and for the whole world, that it would have been a good thing for Adolf Hitler to be stopped. And it's crucial for us to note, and Bonhoeffer recognizes as well, that pacifism did not and would not ever stop Adolf Hitler. Violence did, and resistance did. Bonhoeffer brilliantly ethicizes and theologizes his resistance to Hitler, the Nazis, and the Third Reich.
I have been told that I suffer the days of misfortune with serenity, smiles and pride, as someone accustomed to victory. Am I really what others say about me? Or am I only what I know of myself, bedeviled by anxiety, awaiting great events that might never occur, fearfully powerless and worried for friends far away, weary and empty in prayer, thinking, doing, weak, and ready to take leave of it all? Who am I? They mock me, these lonely questions of mine. Whoever I am, you know me. Oh God, you know I'm yours.
You're the compass and the path. You're the one I follow back. Tower on the shoreline when I've been drifting from this land. I know time is ticking strong. The load is heavy, days are long. My stride is steady, it is straight. We will carry the weight. You're the distant firelight, a close comfort in the night. Fool's gold fortune tells me now, you're the treasure for this ground. I know time is ticking strong. The load is heavy, days are long. Our stride is steady, it is straight. We will carry the weight. We will carry the weight. We will carry the weight. From the shadow now awake, go to carry